Hey folks, how are you? It's been a while and it's time to make something new. Another, I guess, chip tooth creation. So Mother's Day is coming up and I'm going to make my awesome mother a field notes book cover, I guess. And I found a pretty cool little Celtic mother symbol that I'm gonna tool in the front of the leather. So the first thing we had to do was make the template. So this is going to be the outside piece, and I just have a 1/2 inch border all the way around for stitching and gluing and everything. And the notebook will go there, and here's our inner piece. So we'll have the flap for the actual book to go into, and then we'll have a pin roll. We'll roll this up, stitch it, and glue it back here. So you can keep a pin inside with an extra flap on the other side. And just pretty simple. Of course, this is an old one I've used for keeping up with flight times. So we will get her some nice ones. But yeah, Mother's Day gift. Let's see how it goes. Okay. Let's move some stuff out of the way. I have a small shop here to work in. And let's pick the leather we're going to use to cut out for our book holder. Let's see, it's fairly thin. I forget, it's been so long since I've done the ounces of leather to know. I don't recall. This is my thinner. I have some stuff that's quite a bit thicker. I wish I had even thinner than this, but this will be good for a book cover. I want to do some wallets and different things. I made something like this, a little pocket protector to hold a few things. It's been through a few different iterations, holding different things as I need them, want to carry them with them. I wish that was thinner leather, but for the book, this should be plenty. So what we'll do is we will walk around here and find the areas that we like. This is going to be our outside piece, so we want a pretty one to be use this template, and then a decent looking piece for this inside template, because we'll still be able to see this flap here. So there's the two pieces. There's the front piece. I'm going to have the show side, so to speak, and this side with the cutout. The pin is going to be rolled up. The pin holder is going to be rolled up so you can slip a pin in. So one thing I did was my knife wandered on me here. I'd already planned on making this area a little thinner for more room to fit the book sleeve into. So, you know, it was a mistake, but we'll be able to recover from it, because for this to work here, it needs to be a little wider anyways. So that was kind of built in there, but that was an accident. Got to watch out for those things. So next, we'll clean up that final shape, keep moving along. Okay, so let's go ahead and clean up this little area here. Quick fix, like I said, it was somewhat expected. So my cutting board, what we'll do is, let's just pick a size here of, it should be a 1/2 inch, so let's go down and get into just shy and scribe a line. That should still give us enough to do our stitching right here. Same on the other side. Yeah, that'll work. That'll work. Now let's take a punch, find a hole size that works so we can round that corner. All right, so take this right here and pop on all 4 corners. Boom, boom. Done. Back, and we'll get our straight edge and cut out in between. Boom. All right, so, and then we'll clean it up once we deal with cleaning on these edges. I keep saying cleaning, but once we take care of finishing the edges, I'll make all that look a good bit better. So right now, here is our template, what we have. Field notes, notebook, will be able to go in like so. This will be a rounded pen holder. And this is what we have, something like this. I'll thin out some things and put we'll do some tooling of a design here, maybe some lettering in the back. But I believe what we'll do now is get on to tooling the front. Any questions? Now that we have our leather cut out, we have the back panel. We'll put that aside for now, clean it up later. And we want to get the design, or I want to get the design on the front. This is what I picked. I'm kind of gonna cheat. So it's kind of a Celtic mother's knot. I like it. I've got an idea of how I'm gonna tool it in. So we need to get this transferred over to the leather, also in the right place. So to make this easy, let's cut this and that'll be good. So what we're gonna do is basically, I'm gonna lay out the lines for our stitching. Gonna come in about 1/4 inch where we're gonna stitch each piece together. Inside of that, I'm gonna do a little bit of tooling inside the stitch line. So we wanna bring this design over a little more so. I've got, we have about a 1/2 inch to play with. So somewhere in here is where the pattern's going to be. We'll transfer that. So what we have to do is wet the leather a little bit. We'll use some of pre-flight serum and just a sponge and get this soaked, not saturated, but wet enough so that we can transfer this over and then start tooling that design in. All right, need to cut the design in first. Start with this outer one. All right, see, we're cutting into the leather, setting these lines, and that way I can start tooling from there. And if you're interested, this is just a tooling knife. So it swivels. You can put different blades in it. I like working with just a flat blade. So you kind of ride it in on the edge like this. And I use the extended portion over here as the guide of where I'm going. So as long as that's over the right place, the tip that's in the leather is going to follow nicely. And just like with any piece of art that you're working on, it's easier to rotate the piece around. So you want to be able to have it be mobile so that you can get the angles and curves you need easier rather than trying to do an inside curve against the way your body naturally moves. I can ride a curve easily this way, moving the piece around. So I'm always going to move it. And if you have a tighter turn, you can pull the swivel knife out of the leather a little more and only use that acute tip to get kind of the turns you need. And then if you have long straights, you can ride more of that blade, which helps keep you even straighter. So we can ride it straight here, pull that tip out if we need to make a hard turn, and make cuts like that. It just takes practice playing around with it. Used to do this stuff all the time. Now it's just as a project comes up that I feel like doing. Make sure we have the top height of the leather cut. Not deep, you don't want to cut all the way through. All right, does that look better? Yeah. All right, that should be us. So we have the leather design cut in. So it's gonna be the front of it like that. And then what we'll do is we'll stamp in a design going around the edge, and we'll basically, I plan on kind of embossing this design. So we're going to bring these, the knot portion of the design out, and we're going to push the negative in. And we'll do that with different tools, kind of angles on them. We'll come in and just start working around the design. It's where it gets complicated because you got to make sure, especially doing a knot like this, to tool the piece that's going under this side of the knot, this one's going under, and we want to show that, we want to embellish that, accentuate it. Probably will wind up using the crosshatch or maybe the lines. It just depends in places. I'm going to play around with it. We'll re-wet leather a little bit and we will get to doing that. So I'm going to start off with this lined bevel, and I'm going to line all of the crossing points. And then I believe I'm going to edge the embossing knots with the crosshatch. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so that's what we have going right now. It's not perfect. It's, you know, sometimes you need smaller tools and sometimes I've made them, but right now that's the start. So we've got the layers forming. So let's switch over and start basically embossing the whole piece. And this is where it gets kind of tedious. So I'm just gonna start, let's see, if I start on the inside and work my way out, I can gauge the depth a little better than starting on the outside. So we'll see how that goes. When you're not doing something that's a pre-pattern, you're doing it on your own, you just kind of decide what you want to see and go with it. And sometimes you have to keep going until it works, which I missed a spot right here with this one. So there we go. Anywhere else I missed? Y'all notice anything? Missing anything? Yep, right down here. It's easy to make mistakes and forget, especially with this much going on. So we're going to start right here and we're going to work our way outward. And hopefully we have a decent item at the end. So let's see. So you see what's happening as we keep embossing. Now come back and clean up the edges of the actual knot portion as we go along. Just got to get the impressions beginning and we'll just keep moving along. I think at this point might do a bit of a time lapse. Here we're using that swivel knife with an edge guide that's going to give us a set distance from the edge of the leather, and we're going to cut in a border that we'll tool a bevel into down the road. Swivel knife guide. So we just cut a border, and I'm just going to make a simple beveled smooth border, nothing fancy. I tried a few different things and I didn't like what I saw, so that's what we're going to go with. We'll wet that down. I'm really going to get that wet because I'm going to do this by hand, I believe. Smooth bevel. And let's see how this goes. That's what we wind up with. Just a slight embossment, slight beveling the edge. Not embossment, but slightly beveling the edge. All right. That, I do believe, is us. That works. So there you have it. Pretty simple little edge, but I think it will be effective and not too much. Everything else I came up with was just too much. So do something like that. Alrighty, let's keep moving on. So now we're gonna stamp in an establish by date, basically when mom became a mom. So we'll go ahead and hammer in those letters and numbers for the year and for established. And there you have it. The tooling is complete. Now it's time to get working on the inside piece of leather. So what we're doing here is we're forming the loop that's going to hold the pin on the inside, and then we'll have to skive that, which just means thin down the leather that's going to be stitched on the underside. We'll be using the skive tool, which I'm not a fan of, but between this and sandpaper, it's my only option to thin down that leather. And this is always a pretty fun step. So I went ahead and stained the inside edges of this piece of leather with the brown that I'm going to use later on, and put some gum tragacanth or whatever, however you say that word. It's basically, I'm going to burnish the edges here and make them nice and smooth and finished looking. And the gum tea, whatever that stuff is, aids in that process. So years ago, I turned down this piece of oak into a dowel and then turned in just various shapes so that they would fit various pieces of leather, whatever I need to burnish. Put it on the lathe, and then I run it around the edges. Makes a nice smooth finished look to all the edges. So we just had to put the piece of dowel inside to make it a little easier to burnish. But yeah, this is always pretty fun. Now it's time to glue down that pin loop with a little barge cement, poke some holes in it, and lace it up. It's always best to rough the leather up so that barge cement adheres to it a little better. So we'll mark where the flap folds over, and then we'll rough it up with one of the stamps. And now it's time to apply the actual cement. It can be pretty messy. It comes with its own applicator, but rather than pulling out that big applicator and dealing with that mess, just use a little Q-tip and apply the little bit I need on each side of where the flap is and where the flap's going to glue to. Then we'll let the cement set for about 15 minutes before we stick it together. Once the cement touches itself, once we fold it over, it pretty well sticks, but then we'll tap it with a mallet to make sure it adheres well. Then it's on to marking our stitching line and poking some holes. It is finally time to start stitching. As you can see, we're going to use a white stitch. I'm going to stain everything a couple different colors of light brown, and this white stitching should stand off and look pretty nice. We unspool enough thread to do the stitching, which is usually about 3 times the length of the stitches, but in the case of a short section, make sure there's enough to handle it easily. We're using a double stitch, which basically has a needle on each end of the thread, and will work from one side, looping each needle through the same hole as we go across the thread. So here we are just looping the thread through, and then you poke the needle through the thread like you see here, and that helps out to kind of lock that thread on so it doesn't come loose while you're doing the stitching. And here you go. You poke one needle through the first hole, even up the threads, and then start pushing each needle through each subsequent hole. The key is you want, say, the back needle to go through the loop on the same side every time, and that way your stitch is even as you go down the holes. To cap off the threads, you just melt them with a lighter and then press that little melted section down with the metal part of the lighter. Makes it nice and flush. And finish it off with tapping it with your mallet. Now it's time to glue each section of leather together using the barge cement as we do standard practice. Put the cement where you need it after roughing up the leather. Let it sit for about 15 minutes and then we'll press them together. It's best to put something in between the two pieces of leather if they're a little bit larger so they don't stick together before you have it all lined up. So I just use the plate that I used to put a little barge cement on in this case. Then, as always, tap it down with your mallet. Using a compass, we lay out the lines that will be our punch lines for the stitching holes. Okay, it's cleaned off and rubber cemented to itself, and you'll see it's not exactly square. Doing the tooling here spread the leather, and I forgot about accounting for that and making this back piece bigger so I could trim it all at the end. So and same with making this, I should have done all that after it was finalized. I'm not used to doing a full piece inside. Usually I'll do separate flaps when I do something like this, so it's a bit of a learning curve, but I think we can still make it work out. So before I put some dye and stain and color on here, I take just a little, this is just olive oil and a sponge, and just work it in. It lets the leather take the dyes a little bit better, a little more uniform. So we'll go ahead and get this on, and it's just a light coat. Alright, and that takes care of that. Alright, after that oil is dried, let's go ahead and put a little color on it. I'm using an old antique stain that I've had laying around for years. I reconstituted it with a little bit of water, and as you see, we're using a sponge to apply it. It goes really well around that tooled section, so it'll highlight those beveled areas and all those tooling marks. I also just go ahead and apply this color across the whole piece, and then what I don't show is I apply a dark leather stain around the outer perimeter just to give it a little contrast. As I said earlier, those edges aren't square and straight because of the tooling and the fact that I messed up and didn't account for it from the start. So I left enough room between the stitching lines and the holes to be able to sand them off square. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to clean up all four sides and make it nice and square. Here we're using an edge beveling tool, and it does basically just what it sounds like. It bevels the edges, so we'll go around all four corners, top and bottom of the leather, smoothing off, easing off that edge before taking it over the lathe and burnishing it like we did that inside section earlier. Just makes a nice finished looking polished edge of leather. Now that the edges are straight, sanded, and beveled, you got to apply a little stain to them. So I'm using that same dark brown that I didn't show putting on that outer perimeter on the top side. Okay, here it is with just one step left. I'll do the stitching. I'll do that in the hotel room because I have to leave today for a little bit. But yeah, so we put some leather balm with atom wax on it on top of everything. So stitch up the outside, and then we'll go in and clean up where the glue, the rubber cement attaches, and be able to put in our pieces. Okay, as planned, we're not going to waste our time sitting in a hotel. Well, we are going to be sitting in a hotel. We're not going to waste our time while doing so. Let's go ahead and finish lacing this thing up. So basically, you saw a little bit of lacing when I did that right there. It's the same thing. 2 needles, 1 piece of this white lace, twine, whatever you want to call it. It's wax thread, and we'll run it through all of these, making the double stitch all the way around. We'll come back with a final product. Need to go get some field notes for the inside. I'm thinking probably national parks, but we'll see. Yeah, so let's make use of some of this time sitting here doing nothing else.